Hello and welcome back to Film Strips. In this episode, we're diving into a science fiction, romance, and drama movie from 2016 known as Passengers. Be prepared for spoilers. We're introduced to the interstellar spacecraft Avalon, journeying through the cosmos towards a planet named Homestead 2. The ship, operating on autopilot, is silent and devoid of activity, with its 258 crew members and 5,000 passengers deep in hibernation. As the Avalon navigates through space, it encounters an asteroid field, challenging its defenses and redirecting power to bolster its main shield. Amidst this tense moment, a massive asteroid strikes the vessel, triggering a cascade of technical issues. The spacecraft initiates automatic repair processes, yet amidst the chaos, one hibernation pod malfunctions and releases its occupant. Jim Preston, a mechanical engineer by profession, finds himself prematurely awoken. Guided by the ship's automated systems, he learns of his 120-year slumber and the ship's impending arrival at Homestead 2 in 4 months. Jim is advised to make the most of the ship's opulent amenities during the remainder of the voyage. Jim is briefed on how to use his identification band, his living quarters, and the main activities he'll partake in before arriving at the planet. Filled with a mix of excitement and anxiety about meeting others on board, he prepares himself, exits his cabin, and enters a class designed for a group of learners. The atmosphere turns somewhat tense as a hologram lectures about Earth's overcrowded, costly, and lackluster state, instructing him to save his questions until the end. However, Jim's concern grows as he questions why he's the sole attendee, only to realize the hologram can't engage in a dialogue. Continuing his search for human interaction, Jim heads to the ship's central area only to find it deserted. An automated information booth, unable to fulfill his request for human contact, directs him to a steward. Finding no one there either, he seeks out the captain, but access to the bridge is restricted and it becomes apparent that the crew is also in hibernation. In the observatory, Jim uncovers the shocking truth: the ship is 90 years from Homestead 2, meaning his awakening was far too premature. Panicking, he sends a distress message to Earth, seeking guidance on re-entering hibernation. The communication system alerts him to the high cost of the message and the staggering 55-year wait for a response. Faced with this overwhelming reality, Jim is left reeling. Exploring the ship, Jim discovers the onboard bar and encounters what appears to be another person. Engaging in conversation with the bartender, Jim senses something off about him. It's only when the bartender moves to prepare a drink that Jim realizes he's interacting with an android named Arthur. Despite his efforts, Jim finds it challenging to convey the anomaly of his early arrival to Arthur. The following day, Jim wakes in his cabin and heads to the cantina, only to find that most of the menu items are exclusive to gold-class passengers. Settling for a simple coffee, he dedicates himself to solving the puzzle of his malfunctioning hibernation pod. Equipped with the necessary tools, Jim attempts a repair and re-enters the pod, hopeful. However, his efforts yield no change. Undeterred, Jim then applies the tools towards accessing the crew's hibernation chambers, but this endeavor also proves futile. As he navigates these challenges, minor malfunctions sporadically disrupt the tranquility of the ship. Jim increasingly finds solace at the bar, engaging in conversations with Arthur, the android bartender. Arthur's counsel eventually persuades Jim to indulge himself by accessing a gold-class suite and exploring the ship's luxuries, including its restaurants, games, and entertainment offerings. Despite these diversions, Jim's isolation deepens, leading to a profound sense of misery. In a moment of desolation fueled by alcohol, Jim stumbles upon an airlock equipped with spacesuits. Driven by impulse, he dons one and ventures outside the ship, where the vastness of space captivates him. Experiencing this unique moment as the sole conscious human leaves him overwhelmed with a mix of awe and despair. Temporarily disconnecting from the ship, he floats freely in space, confronting his solitude. Returning inside, Jim contemplates ending his despair in the airlock without the protection of a spacesuit. At the last second, he reconsiders, retreating from the brink of self-destruction only to slip on a bottle. This fall, however, leads him to a pivotal discovery: a woman named Aurora, sleeping in one of the hibernation pods. Her presence ignites a new interest, pulling him away from the edge of despair. Jim delves into the ship's directory to unearth Aurora's personal files and views her passenger interview, quickly becoming captivated by her persona. He finds himself repeatedly drawn to her hibernation pod, listening to her interviews and immersing himself in her world. His fascination with Aurora continues to grow as he spends time in the bar, engrossed in her written works and discussing her talent with Arthur, the android bartender. Haunted by the cruel twist of fate, Jim reflects on the irony of his predicament, embarking on a journey to a new world for a fresh start only to wake prematurely and discover his ideal partner, who remains just beyond his reach. The idea of awakening Aurora starts to consume him, leading to conflicted discussions with Arthur, who fails to grasp the moral dilemma at hand. Waking her would mean condemning her to share his fate, an outcome Jim initially resists. However, as time marches on, his resolve weakens under the weight of loneliness and longing. Eventually, Jim succumbs to his desires and activates Aurora's pod, initiating her premature awakening. As she undergoes the same disorienting process he once did, Jim retreats, watching from a distance. When he finally ventures back to the main area of the ship, he finds Aurora bewildered and facing the stark reality of her situation, echoing his own initial shock and confusion. Jim reveals to Aurora that they are the only ones awake and leads her to the observatory. He shares with her his inability to access the crew or the ship's main controls. Overwhelmed, Aurora panics, expressing a desperate wish to return to her hibernation pod. Upon reaching the pod, Jim is forced to admit that the ship lacks the necessary technology to reinitiate hibernation, effectively stranding them both. They return to the concourse, where Jim suggests Aurora rest to recover from the effects of hibernation. Touched by Jim's solitary ordeal, Aurora sympathizes with the extensive loneliness he endured. Jim, wrestling with guilt over his actions, retreats to the bar and implores Arthur to keep the secret of his involvement in Aurora's premature awakening. The following day, Aurora, now awake, revisits the concourse, inquiring about the hibernation pods at the automated information desk. Jim finds her there, and together they head for breakfast. As they depart, the information desk experiences a glitch, hinting at underlying issues aboard the ship. At the cantina, Aurora notices the monotony of Jim's meals over the past year and offers him a selection from the gold class menu. Their conversation turns to the hibernation pods. While Jim has accepted the grim reality, Aurora refuses to concede defeat. Her determination drives her to comb through the infirmary, delve into research documents, and even attempt to force entry into the crew's hibernation area in search of a solution. Meanwhile, Jim observes an increasing number of glitches and malfunctions plaguing the ship. As time progresses, Aurora contemplates her new life aboard the Avalon, engaging in writing, jogging, and swimming, all the while becoming acutely conscious of her predicament. Seeking to capture Jim's story, Aurora interviews him at the cantina. She inquires about his reasons for migrating to the colony. Initially, Jim recites the company's promotional phrases but eventually reveals his personal aspiration to forge a significant life on the new planet. Their interaction deepens in the observatory, where Aurora divulges her unique circumstances. Unlike her fellow voyagers, she possesses a round-trip ticket. Her ambition was to spend a year on Homestead and return to Earth, aspiring to be the pioneering journalist to document such a journey and pen an unparalleled narrative. Gradually, Aurora starts to accept that there may not be a solution to their situation. In an effort to lift her spirits, Jim orchestrates a series of enjoyable activities. He takes her dancing, to watch movies, and to play basketball. Their day of diversion culminates at the bar, where he introduces her to Arthur. However, the temporary distraction cannot fully erase the reality of their predicament, and Aurora's mood soon turns somber once more. Jim, left to reflect with Arthur, is consumed by guilt for the impact of his decisions on Aurora. In a moment of creativity, he immerses himself in a project, which Aurora discovers when she enters the observatory to find a meticulously crafted miniature of the Chrysler Building, a gesture of his affection. Subsequently, they share a date at the bar, engaging in dinner and heartfelt conversations. Aurora opens up about her personal life, revealing the loss of her father during her teenage years. The evening progresses to an extraordinary moment as Jim leads Aurora to the airlock, where they don spacesuits and venture outside for a spacewalk. This experience allows Jim to finally share the awe-inspiring vastness of space with someone, deepening their connection amidst the stars. Floating freely together in the vastness of space, Jim and Aurora share a moment of weightlessness before returning to the interior of the ship. Their spacewalk concludes with a passionate kiss, leading them to Jim's cabin, where they spend the night together. This marks the beginning of their life as a couple aboard the spacecraft. Aurora relocates to Jim's cabin, documenting her experiences on the ship. Their days are filled with shared activities, jogging, dining, and resting together, fostering a deepening bond between them. In his exploration of the ship, Jim discovers the hydroponics bay from which he brings Aurora flowers, adding a touch of romance to their unconventional life. Their relationship reaches a new peak as they witness the awe-inspiring sight of a red giant from the observatory, coinciding with Aurora's birthday. The celebration continues into the evening with a dinner in one of the ship's restaurants followed by drinks at the bar. In a moment of anticipation, Jim excuses himself to the washroom to prepare a ring he has fashioned for Aurora. Meanwhile, Aurora engages in conversation with Arthur at the bar. Unaware of the promise Jim made to keep the truth hidden, Arthur inadvertently reveals that Jim was responsible for waking Aurora prematurely. Jim returns to find Aurora confronting him, her shock and disbelief shattering the tranquility of their makeshift paradise. In a state of fury and panic, Aurora flees, leaving Jim to discover that she has removed all her belongings from his cabin. The following day, their paths cross in the cantina, but Aurora bolts the moment Jim attempts to communicate. Overwhelmed by betrayal, Aurora confronts Jim one night, her anger manifesting physically as she strikes him, grappling with the urge to inflict harm. Jim, relegated to communicating via the ship's intercom due to Aurora's avoidance, attempts to offer an apology and justify his actions, explaining that his feelings for her had grown into love. However, Aurora remains unmoved, unable to overlook the irreversible change he's made to her life. Amidst this personal turmoil, the ship encounters a severe malfunction, signaling a critical system failure that leads to the shutdown of the main command. Later, as Jim uses the elevator, it too malfunctions, further highlighting the deteriorating state of the ship. Aurora discovers a tree that Jim has planted in the main concourse, a poignant symbol amidst the chaos. Her visit to the cantina is met with yet another malfunction, this time affecting the food dispensary. Suddenly, the deck chief's voice breaks the silence over the comms, inquiring about the tree's origins. Rushing to the concourse, both Aurora and Jim are met with the sight of Gus Mancuso, the deck chief, standing before the tree Jim had planted, marking the beginning of a new chapter in their crisis aboard the ship. After encountering Gus Mancuso, Jim and Aurora explain the peculiar situation with the malfunctioning pods, leaving the chief puzzled by the anomaly of 3 pod failures. Mancuso guides them to the bridge to further investigate the ship's condition, discovering issues that necessitate manual checks for a deeper understanding. Exiting the bridge, a near-miss incident with a malfunctioning robot prompts Jim and Aurora to inform Mancuso about the increasing frequency of malfunctions throughout the ship, a situation Mancuso acknowledges should not be occurring. He then demonstrates how to gather the necessary data for analysis. While Mancuso inspects the hibernation pods, Jim reveals his discovery concerning the malfunction of Aurora's pod, an action that Mancuso finds deeply troubling. As Mancuso reviews the collected data on the bridge, Aurora seeks him out to discuss her pod, but he admits there's little he can do to rectify the situation. Jim arrives with yet another malfunctioning robot, indicating the severity of the ship's deteriorating state. Mancuso begins to feel the effects of hibernation sickness and decides to rest, but not before exhibiting alarming signs of ill health, such as coughing up blood. That night, Aurora's inability to find sleep leads her to the swimming pool. However, an unexpected loss of gravity turns her leisurely swim into a life-threatening ordeal as she finds herself trapped within a floating mass of water. The ship's gravity drive eventually reactivates, and Aurora narrowly escapes drowning, highlighting the escalating danger aboard the spacecraft. Jim and Aurora, both racing to find Mancuso, converge at the bridge where, together with the dying chief, they piece together the sequence of events plaguing the ship. Mancuso deduces a critical incident 2 years prior that compromised a major system, necessitating urgent repairs to prevent the entire ship from being compromised. Their search for the malfunction leads to Mancuso's collapse, and in the infirmary, they face the grim reality of his inevitable demise, with no available treatments to save him. In his final moments in the observatory, Mancuso entrusts Jim with his ID bracelet, urging them to repair the ship before passing away. As the situation escalates with warning lights and the ship's violent tremors, Jim and Aurora rush to engineering amidst successive system failures, including a compromised gravity drive and Arthur's malfunction. In engineering, they identify the source of the issue within the power plant. An attempt to seal a breach nearly results in disaster as both are momentarily sucked towards the breach before successfully sealing it. Their investigation reveals multiple breaches along the meteor's path, including critical damage to the reactor control computer. Despite sourcing and replacing the damaged part, their efforts to vent the reactor manually falter. Jim concludes that the vent door must be opened from outside the ship, a perilous task that involves him risking his life. Before embarking on this dangerous mission, he entrusts Aurora with Mancuso's bracelet, acknowledging the possibility that he might not return. Aurora assists Jim with his suit, her plea for his return underlining her deep connection to him. Meanwhile, she faces her own peril back at the reactor as its temperature reaches critical levels, resulting in an injury from a projectile bolt. Outside, Jim advances towards the vent door, determined to rectify the ship's dire condition and ensure its and Aurora's survival. As the reactor room's temperature escalates, Jim works on manually overriding the vent door to facilitate cooling. He quickly understands the necessity of physically holding the door open to allow the reactor to vent, a dangerous task he communicates to Aurora. Despite her objections, realizing the gravity of their situation and the need to save the ship's inhabitants, she reluctantly initiates the venting process at his insistence. The venting proves successful, but the expulsion of reactor fumes violently propels Jim into space, severing his tether and compromising his suit's pressure. In a desperate bid to save him, Aurora rushes to don another suit, aiming to retrieve Jim amidst her own apologies and fears. Facing the challenge of a tether too short to reach him, Aurora's determination sees her catching hold of Jim's tether in a critical moment, enabling her to pull him back to the ship. She manages to drag him into the infirmary, only to discover that he has succumbed to his injuries. Refusing to accept his fate, Aurora utilizes Mancuso's bracelet to bypass the infirmary's medical limitations, initiating an emergency protocol to resuscitate Jim, holding onto hope and their shared future aboard the Avalon. The medical pod automatically performs life-saving procedures, successfully reviving Jim. In the aftermath, Aurora reaches a place of forgiveness and they move forward. Together, they repair Arthur and honor Mancuso with a respectful send-off into the cosmos. Jim shares with Aurora his discovery of converting the medical pod into a makeshift hibernation chamber, offering her the chance to spend the remainder of the voyage in suspended animation. However, Aurora chooses to remain awake and spend her life with Jim on the Avalon. Jim's proposal marks the beginning of their shared existence aboard the spacecraft. Fast forward 88 years, the Avalon completes its journey to Homestead 2. The awakening crew is met with a ship transformed by the lives Jim and Aurora led in isolation. Aurora's message to the crew serves as a testament to their extraordinary saga, a narrative of love, survival, and adaptation in the vastness of space. Stay tuned for more explorations into captivating stories and make sure to engage with our content for future updates. Thank you for joining us on this journey.